Welcome to today's ASRG World webinar. We have the 24th of June 2021 and we are streaming from Stuttgart in Germany. Thank you for being with us. My name is Sven Schran and I am coordinating with ASRG the European locations. The Automotive Security Research Group is now nearly 4 years old and we are a non-profit organization which provides a platform for the automotive security industry as well as related academics or organizations to share knowledge, build powerful networks and valuable collaborations. This community is for you and it is based on volunteer support. If you want to know more details about ASRG, please check out our webpage at www.asrg.io. Maybe you have an idea for a nice project and look for partners to realize it. You would like to start your own location, you have an idea about a service ASRG could provide, or you simply know a great organization which could partner with ASRG. We are open to hear each idea you have in mind and would like to discuss how ASRG can support it. Don't hesitate and get in touch with us. You quickly can send us an email with your thoughts to hello@asrg.io. So, this is now enough from my side, and I don't want to keep you tortured anymore because I'm sure you are waiting very curiously for our main presentation. Like every time, in case you have questions during the presentation, please write it in the chat window. After the session, we will have some more minutes for question and answers. And now it's my pleasure to welcome Tony Cole, Chief Technology Officer at Ativo Networks. Today, he will bring to us the topic Cyber Supply Chain Risk Management and Resilience. And now I would like to hand over to Tony. Please, the virtual stage is yours.
Thank you very much. Really appreciate everybody joining us today. Thanks to ASRG for inviting me to give this presentation, and I look forward to the questions at the end and hope you gained some small modicum of information out of this presentation that can help you in your daily jobs. I'm very pleased to be asked to participate in ASRG with this presentation, since I think collaboration is key to us solving some of the problems that we have in the cybersecurity space. And of course, supply chain is a major concern with many cases as of late. That have had a major impact around the globe. So let's jump right into it. First, just really quick, a little bit about me. As Sven said, I'm the CTO at Ativo Networks. Before that, I was at FireEye, McAfee, and Symantec as an executive there running consulting, global government, critical infrastructure, and have been focused on these issues for a long time. And I'm retired from the US Army as a cyber operator and got my start in cryptography long before this industry was an industry or cool to be in cyber. So I really enjoy it, and I hope that you get some information out of this that's helpful in your daily role. So our agenda. First, again, thank you for being here. I appreciate it. We're going to talk a little bit about the problem, some supply chain issues, and that's really where we'll get engaged, because I think probably most of you know the problem today, but I still think it's worth spending a couple minutes on and talking about it. We'll hit on risk management and how we can get engaged in that space to help solve problems, what ASRG is trying to do. We'll talk about resilience, fighting through the battle. We'll touch on Mitre Attack and Shield that are a big component of resilience and helping you. Probably many of you know those, at least one of those systems. And then some of the solutions that my own company has that can help solve some of these challenges around understanding breaches and how to shrink dwell time. So first, I think everyone knows the attack surface is evolving faster than security. When you look at some of the images that are here, and that's just a tiny little component of them, we're seeing connectivity get dropped into everything with ICS systems, OT systems, IoT systems. Sensors are going everywhere that are interconnected and tied into the internet. And I think we're going to continue to have a major issue if we don't focus on it. And I apologize, everybody. I didn't expect a hotel room phone to start ringing when everything else is muted. So, but again, the attack surface is evolving really fast. The amount of connected devices is absolutely unreal, in the billions. So I think we're going to continue to see that. So, and I'll just unplug this phone and that solves that problem. That's a new one for me. Solved. So this is one of my favorite images out there. If you've not seen it before, it's really cool. It's a company, information is beautiful, and they provide visualization around some different data sources out there. And this one is, focused on the world's biggest data breaches by the number of records stolen. And you can paint this however you want. There's all kinds of options for changing the color sets and rebuilding the structure of it. But what's interesting is this is just 2011 to 2020. And you can see when I did my image here, I cut it off on one side. The amount of data breaches is absolutely unreal when you think about it. And the fact that all of this while global security spend, according to IDC, is going to surpass 133 billion by next year. And yet still, all these breaches are taking place. And I think the other piece we have to think about as well is the breaches are more impactful. We've seen larger and larger breaches hit us, and I think that's going to continue to be problematic. I think there's a tremendous amount of work to be done for governments to work together to drive out criminal behavior, as well as to ensure from the nation state side doing espionage against each other that it's less impactful to companies that are just trying to thrive within their own economy and the global economy. So I think that's critically important. But if you're a person that likes looking at data visually, that's a great site to check out. Unfortunately, they also have COVID data there that you can look at. I like looking at the information security space myself instead. But the point is that breaches continue to happen and accelerate, and now they're becoming more and more impactful. I think probably a great example of that for the U.S. perspective was the Colonial Pipeline breach that happened, where it took down an oil and gas pipeline for a number of days and caused gas shortages in the United States on the East Coast. So quite problematic. And if that had happened in the middle of winter, could have even led to deaths. So I think this is an area we're going to have to continue to focus on. We all know detecting attackers is tough. And when you look at this space, it's really tough in the supply chain. Probably the best example of that is SolarWinds, and we'll talk about that in a few minutes. But what we really need to do is, we just need those right controls to make a breach harder for attackers. We need to detect those attacks quickly and accurately, because if we do that, then we can help really mitigate the impact of a breach. And by doing that, if an adversary gets into your system and you contain them, they never break out of that first box. You immediately detect them once they do hit it. Then you can, mitigate that impact, because they might have gotten in, but they didn't steal anything. They weren't able to encrypt anything. And you can operate through that breach, get a lesson learned from it, and then react accordingly. And that really is making your network more resilient. Somebody got in, but they couldn't steal what they wanted. They couldn't encrypt your drives. They couldn't really have impact. Instead, you learned a lesson and you moved on. So supply chain attacks. This is a quote that I really, really like. It's a lot of fun. If you're just listening, I'll read it to you so you can hear it, but it's very interesting. It's from earlier this year. It was originally a Wired article that was covered by Ars Technica and others. And you'll see a lot of links in my slides here as well, so you can reference this information to do your own research. But supply chain attacks are scary because they're really hard to deal with, and because they make it clear you're trusting a whole ecology. You're trusting every vendor whose code is on your machine, and you're trusting every vendor's vendor. And that's from Nick Weaver, security researcher at UC Berkeley's International Computer Science Institute. And I really think that puts it in terms that we can all think about. You're trusting every vendor's vendor. So that's an important thing to really take in and think about when you look at supply chain risk management for your organization. And we've seen so many breaches, that have really hit the supply chain, and those breaches have been more impactful than even some of the ransomware cases out there. So this is another document I think that really helps explain supply chain risk management. And this is a really new one that came out earlier or late last year from, believe it or not, from the Director of National Intelligence in the United States. So they released a document. It's just 6 pages. The link is there. It's public. And it really puts together some good information that can help us think about supply chain problems today, and look at it from a full perspective of what we need to do as we build our plan to help mitigate risk to that supply chain. You've got to look at that content and design because you can lose your intellectual property through that. You've got to look for unintentional design modifications where somebody may have changed something. You've got to look at the manufacture and integration processes where somebody could insert malware, you could lose intellectual property, or counterfeit parts. And before I move off that one, what I used to do, sometimes I would give an example through ordering a new iPad, for instance, and I would do captures. So through the tracking for the shipping agency, showing all the places that my iPad went before it was delivered to my hands. And it really gives you just a really good idea of, as things are moving through the process to get to your hands as a consumer, whether you order something online or you pick it up at a local store, that it touches a lot of other hands. And if this is something for your enterprise and something that's really important to your organization, how can you trust that its integrity is still intact when it arrives? So that's something to think about. Were counterfeit parts inserted in it? Was the software changed in it? Were additional parts added to it that shouldn't have been there? So the next piece, of course, is deployment, product tampering, product theft, maintenance. Do you have maintenance teams that come in that are third party, that could potentially tamper with your products, or tamper with products that they didn't have access to, unauthorized access? And then retirement is another area where a lot of people don't really think this thing through when they're getting rid of products, when they're getting rid of software. Do you roll it out of your system? Do you remove permissions on it? Is there intellectual property still inside that system? Those are really important pieces to think about as you go through the process of from the initial idea for what you need to all the way through the life cycle to getting rid of it. So pieces we must think about. And here's another graphical one that I like as well. The images are courtesy of the NCSC in the UK, the United Kingdom. And I like the way this is structured, where it shows, malware, could be inserted into a third-party software vendor, a la SolarWinds. We saw that, where there was a backdoor added to the SolarWinds Orion software, unbeknownst to SolarWinds or their customers. I think that is a really important one for us to think about, because the company, Mandiant/FireEye, that discovered it, it took them 9 months to discover it. Now, there were a lot of companies impacted by this that were breached, and none of them discovered it. Only one company did. So you have to wonder at that point, through supply chain attacks, are there other breaches ongoing that simply haven't been discovered yet? And I think that is problematic, that we must, think about as well, and really build a robust and well-structured supply chain risk management structure for cybersecurity to ensure that it's not ongoing inside our own environments, because quite frankly, it could be. I would suspect the odds are, if everybody in ASRG was listening to this, somewhere out there, some of you are already breached and simply not aware of it. So let's hope not. The next piece there is, a redirect script, where a cyber attacker can put a script in, that can go through a creative or digital agency that does a redirect out to legitimate business websites, but it's got, a malicious script in it that can actually inject code down and cause significant issues and impact the supply chain. The backdoor access is the one we just talked about, where a backdoor was dropped into SolarWinds. That's problematic as well. And this one's through third-party data storage. That one is very interesting to me. I just got hit with one of those. Company I bought something from had my data. That data was in a third-party data storage for one of their partners, and that company was breached, and I just got my notification letter on it. So even when we're in this field, I think we all know that we can't control the security of our own data, simply put, because unless you want to live in a shack in the woods and not interact with society, you're going to have data out there somewhere that somebody else is in control of and you're not. So that's important to understand for all of your data goes for your companies, and who is controlling that, and what does their supply chain risk management structure look like to ensure that they're not breached and you're liable for it, as well as the need to protect your customers' PII data. The last one, of course, is a cyber attacker doing a redirect script into a compromised server, and it can compromise a website. There isn't a lot of talk around these lately, but it's pretty common, and some people call that a waterhole attack, where you may see a system, somebody's targeting an individual or an organization, and they know that organization visits a specific website on a frequent basis, maybe news for their vertical that they're in, and they will compromise maybe a third-party advertisement server that's a small company that doesn't have the same level of sophistication in their security processes and practices. So they compromise them. They know that feeds advertisements to that site, and maybe it's a vulnerability, a known one that hasn't been patched, or it's a 0-day that potentially could lead to a compromise on one of the endpoints in the targeted organization. So it's certainly something to consider. Those are still happening, even though they're not discussed a lot today. So it's interesting. This morning, I was doing another podcast on CyberHub, and we were talking about the news this morning. And the host, James Azar, there came up with a couple really good ones to discuss. And one was the Atlassian bugs could have led to a one-click takeover. And when you look at the companies that use Atlassian software, it could have been worse potentially than SolarWinds. So it was great that it was a company doing research in this area that notified them, to solve these problems, because some of these sites that use this software, like GitHub, Jira, and a number of others, are huge. They're absolutely huge. Thousands and thousands, tens of thousands of organizations use that software. So I think this is an area that we're going to continue to see a focus from researchers around the globe on, looking for 0 days in software code, so they can, hopefully get the organization informed of the problem and get a patch out before they release any information on it, out to the general public, so it can't be taken advantage of with exploit code. I think that's critically important. The other one we talked about this morning was the Linux marketplaces as well, based on the Pling platform. Those also, had a challenge as well that could have led to a major supply chain breach as well for many people that are using that Pling platform. It's a mouthful, Pling platform. But it's really important to think about it from that perspective, that we need more research into this area by really good researchers that follow, the vulnerabilities equities process, and will go through and have that conversation with the company and provide information to them so they can, release a patch, get the software updated long before their research is released, so that we don't have another SolarWinds style attack, take place. Just a couple others. People don't really, before SolarWinds, people didn't talk a lot about the supply chain breaches that have happened in the past. And I think it's kind of important to think about it from a number of different perspectives. The Target data breach, I think probably everybody knows about that one. It was through a third-party HVAC company. 2017, Domino's Pizza in Australia, had a third-party breach as well. And of course, the 2017 Maersk attack, that was NotPetya. And I think we need to look at it from that perspective. Not only are we trying to lock down the cybersecurity component of our supply chain, the physical components of our supply chain, but we also need to look potentially at the impact, some of these breaches can have on our supply chain. JBS was a major one that just happened, a South American company that had significant issues, caused the prices of meat to jump in a number of places around the globe. I'm trying to think of another one that just happened as well, but these are things we need to really start focusing on. And I was just very pleased to see the stories, again this morning on Atlassian and Linux Marketplace, where researchers were focused in this area, and help solve some of the problems, especially since both of these were in the last 2 days. So hopefully we're starting to see researchers really pivot in that direction that can help us solve some of these problems and potentially uncover some supply chain attacks that are ongoing that we're simply not aware of yet because it hasn't been discovered. That's a scary point to me, especially when people talk about SolarWinds and they say, the worst cyber breach in history. Well, my response always is the same thing: it's that we know of, because it could be ongoing and we simply aren't aware, that some other well-used software has been breached as well. I hope not. Be nice to be wrong on that. So SolarWinds, how big of a wake-up call, do we really need? And I think that's a really important point, that we have to think about and we have to really consider. We have had a number of wake-up calls in the past. And when SolarWinds happened, I listened to some of the Senate Intelligence Committee and the Homeland Security Committee in the United States Congress. So where they grilled CEOs from CrowdStrike, from FireEye, the SolarWinds CEO, the president of Microsoft. And I had a couple of reporters ask me and said, so what did you think of the testimony? And I said, well, what I'm really afraid is that you could record that testimony and play it, during the next big case 2-3 years from now, once we discover it. And quite frankly, some of that testimony could have been played 2 or 3 years ago, 4 or 5 years ago. And I'm afraid that we're going to continue down the same path if we don't really understand, that supply chain attacks can really have a significant impact on our way of life. So we need to start focusing research in this area. We need to build some global cyber norms, and we need to get people to understand what is off limits, when doing some of these even nation state attacks, so that we can respond accordingly. Where nations are working together on the criminal side, to eradicate this activity where it's impacting, people's lives and their livelihoods. So I won't jump into it deep on the SolarWinds. I think this is everybody's read, 2, 5, 10, 20 articles on it. It's been discussed in depth, but I wanted to put out there from our perspective what we were looking at. And some of this is from Microsoft. And I think very, very interesting, that the attacker, moved laterally, stole credentials from endpoints, performed LDAP enumeration, performed a DC sync attack, and I won't go any further, but, living off the land, when you look at these supply chain attacks, is a major, major issue. If you can go through and very closely mimic what's normal activity inside an organization, then it's much, much more difficult to get caught, which is why we need to look for that lateral movement and privilege escalation. And we'll talk about that a little bit later. So this is from NIST. If you're not familiar with NIST, probably most of you are, but NIST is the National Institute of Standards in Technology in the United States. They have built the cybersecurity framework that's running in about 22 countries, which is why I referenced them. And right now, they're working on a draft special publication, 800-161, revision 1. You can see the link down there. And the reason I bring this up is that was released in April of this year. I know the date is May, but I think it was April this year when it was released, or when they did the workshop probably. But the point is that they're soliciting input, from around the world for their new 800-160 version 1 focused on supply chain risk management. And there's some great information. NIST is trying to look at best practices and really build a great structure that'll probably tie into the cybersecurity framework that they have that can help us tremendously, be more successful if we follow the processes in countering these supply chain attacks. So if you just look at some of these questions that they put together, and I've got 2 slides on this, it's really good, just looking at these and giving you some potential new perspectives on questions you should be asking your vendors and your suppliers and your partners out there on what they're doing to ensure that you're successful. Obviously, you want to ensure that you've got best practices in place inside your organization, but you need everybody you trust. And I go back to that comment from that researcher at Berkeley. You have to worry about every vendor and every vendor's vendor. So some people say open source. Well, there's a lot of open source libraries that have had compromises as well. So we really have to think about it from that perspective. And I won't read all these questions to you because I know it's a tremendous amount of information there, but it's in the slides and you can look through, and it's really, really important. I talked about, tamper-proof. You get a new iPad, has it been opened? Has it been modified? Would you know? Could you tell? Maybe you get your next update from Apple. Maybe you would know then, but on the other side of that, maybe, that adversary has it set up so it bricks it at that point in time. So they got information they needed once you set it up and connected it to the internet, and then it's bricked. And I'm not saying that happened. I'm saying it's a just good example for us to think about. Back doors closed, that is a really interesting one to me. There's been so many discussions over the years where vendors, when they're creating a new technology, put a back door in it, and they do it on purpose so they can go through and work on the code and provide updates as it goes through alpha and then goes through beta before it's released to the public. Did they remember to close those back doors? Did they remember to eliminate that code? Because could the back door be opened up again? So these are important points we need to think about, when it pertains to our suppliers and the technology, hardware and software that we're buying, and the software that runs our hardware. You need to look at the physical piece as well. That's critically important. You can't look at just, the software side of it, because again, it's a supply chain. It's the full component. Are the physical security measures in place? Are they documented? Are they audited? And like I said, if you look at the first sub-question in there, how do they protect and store customer data? A company I trusted, like I said, just updated me that they were breached, or I should say one of their suppliers was breached and my data was lost. And I would suspect that's probably happened to most people on this listening to this video. It's pretty common today. I think my wife was keeping count. I think that's our 8th or 9th cyber breach we've been involved in, and none of those have been lost, through our own practices. They've been lost by companies that we've provided our trust to, so with our data. So that's really important. A couple of the sub questions that I do want to point out here, I touched on earlier, but it's an area that's often ignored. How is the data destroyed when the partnership is dissolved? If you get rid of a vendor that has your data, is that data destroyed? Is it dumped? Is it eradicated? And that's really interesting because the laws vary very widely as well, depending on the country you're in and the region of the world that you're in. But I think what's really important is when you build a partnership, you ensure that it's in the agreement, that data is destroyed once you decide that partnership is over and you end that relationship with that company. I think I won't belabor these anymore. You've got these here, really good information from NIST. And again, the links are in here. I highly recommend, if this is an area of your focus, and even if it isn't, it's a good area to make yourself very familiar with. But go out to the website and look at not only the draft publication, the special publication for this, but look at the comments that people put in, because it can give you a lot of ideas when you start seeing people from different verticals providing suggestions back on how something should be structured to ensure they mitigate risk for, an electric provider, oil and gas company, a retail company, a law firm. So you really get some interesting perspectives out there that you might not have thought about before, because all of those types of organizations are also your providers for your company too. So hopefully you get a new perspective when you look at those comments and questions from other people outside other verticals that you may not think about, specifically, except that, well, that's the company I get my power from. Big deal. But it may be a bigger deal than you think, is my point. Resilience. This is a really, really important point, and it's one small point out of what NIST is doing with their cyber supply chain risk management practices. You can see, when they look at the SCRM, there's a whole bunch of different pieces that they cover, and this image is right out of their draft publication. But I just wanted to touch on the resilience piece as it pertains to our conversation today. Resilience is focused on ensuring the cyber supply chain will provide required products and services, and these products and services will be able to sufficiently perform or recover under stress or failure. And I think I extracted that out of the draft publication because it's so important. So many conversations with CISOs and security teams and boards around the globe, and they talk about supply chain. And that's the big question. Can your systems afford to be shut down? Think about it from a financial services perspective, and you may run billions of dollars or yen or euros, pick your currency, through that system in an hour. Can you shut that system down if it gets breached? What about interdependent systems? Can you shut those down if there's a breach? Or are you just completely hobbling your company? Colonial Pipeline is a great example of that. They stated their OT systems were not impacted, when that breach happened, but they shut them down. So because of their IT systems, and lots of speculation around that. But the point is that, in shutting that down, it had significant impact on the economy and the people that relied on Colonial Pipeline. So those are things you really need to think about. And I'm sure they're looking through and redoing their supply chain risk management as well. And the second question I put on there is, can you operate through the breach? Resilience. Can you go through and can you clean up the breach? Can you contain the adversary inside your system and continue your operations that others may rely on, as a something that's, critically important to your economy? Those are really important things to think about, especially talking to this group, ASRG, and as we see more and more connected cars out there, can you operate through the breach? If a car gets compromised, can you put the mechanisms in place to ensure that no one can shut down the engine when you're doing 160 kilometers an hour on the highway? Can you ensure that no one can activate the brakes when someone's going that fast, or take over the steering? There's so many different pieces to this. Airline industry is a great example, where there's been a lot of discussion, and I've done a lot of panels on that, talking about the aviation industry and ensuring that, all of the flight controls or avionics are separated from the systems that, the passengers access for media entertainment, throughout long flights. That's one where, your media system could get breached. You've got to ensure that it's not connected to the avionics system at all, because if not, could they potentially do something that could cause a catastrophic failure? So, and large loss of life. So resilience is really, really important. Can you systems afford to be shut down, and can you operate through that breach? So we need to think about it from that perspective. How can you mitigate impact of that breach while continuing your operations, and build your plan accordingly? So I'm going to take a slight twist here on the resilience side, because this really can help you build a resilient system and structure. So you need to look at Mitre Attack and Mitre Shield. I suspect probably most of you on this call, if you're in cybersecurity, you know what Mitre Attack is. It's an open source structure that Mitre has created. If you're not familiar with Mitre, they're a nonprofit, but they're a federally funded research and development corporation for the United States, created for the government. But one of the tasks they've been tasked with is to provide capabilities back to industry. And Mitre Attack has been broadly adopted around the globe. So where it looks at attacker TTPs, how is the attacker moving through based on the categorization of that actor through your systems. So and it doesn't matter if you're looking at, Cozy Bear, APT28, Fin6, whatever company is giving the naming structure, Mitre has done a great job on tracking that and providing in a structured format the information for you to understand those tactics and techniques, for proactive defense. So for proactive understanding of the attacker. That is all Mitre Attack, and it's a very dynamic living document that's updated frequently. And in another slide here, I've got the links. If you're not familiar with that, I highly recommend you take a look at it. Most advanced security teams are looking at Mitre Attack a lot and very engaged. Mitre Shield is this is kind of like the yin and yang. Mitre Shield is the defensive techniques on here's, you look at attack and here's how the attacker comes through. This is what they do when they come in. Here's maybe the folders they create. Here's the tools they use. Here's a DLL they drop. The Mitre Shield side is building defensive structures specific to every one of those attack steps. So it's really, really interesting, very, very helpful. And you can just go through and look this information up so you understand if I've got this attacker coming after me from this group, be them financially motivated or a nation state, here's typically what they do. And the Mitre Shield side helps you tremendously because that shield side can tell you here are the defensive techniques and things I need to do to counter that adversary who I know is targeting me because they're after other people in my vertical, or I know I have high value assets that they may want. So it's a really important thing to look at, understanding Mitre Attack and Mitre Shield. And there's more and more nonprofit organizations doing work around Mitre Attack as well. I know there's a big one in the EU run by Freddie DeJure, so where he has tons of people join that I think it's once a quarter he runs those programs. So Mitre Attack, again, globally accessible knowledge base. There's a link down there. It's attack.mitre.org. And really interesting, one of the things that we have done, of course, is gone through and mapped our capabilities directly against Mitre Attack to see how we provide capabilities to organizations out there that are being targeted, by some of the actors that are tracked within Mitre Attack. So highly recommend you take a look at it. Shield, as I mentioned, was put together to start a conversation about the benefits of active defense. Really interestingly, there was a new system that was released day before yesterday, called Mitre Defend. So, and it's D3 Fend instead of an E, D3 Fend. Really interesting, and it was subsidized, and it's public. They issued a press release, subsidized by the U.S. National Security Agency to provide capabilities out there on the defend side against attack. So I think when you look at attack, defend is going to go hand in hand with that. And they also released a tool that allows people to more tightly integrate via API into attack as well, in conjunction with that defend release. So really, really interesting. All the tools that are coming out that are free and open for people to look inside and build a structure that works for them based on the high value assets they have, the vertical they sit in, and potentially who's targeting them. And I think that's a really important way to look at it, is an adversary focus. So I need a little water here. Mitre's new Shield framework really does present that information in a matrix format. So much like Attack, and Defend does the same thing. And they have mapped them into use cases that you can use. And we've done the same thing. We've mapped our capabilities against Shield as well, to show people how we fit in. In fact, we like Attack so much, we built Attack into our dashboard. So where people can go through and understand when they see an attack from our systems directly how that relates to the TTPs inside Attack. So you can click on that link and go straight to it if you wish. It's pretty cool. So I know I'm getting a little low on time here, so I'm going to jump in a little bit and talk about some of what we're doing, specific to helping people with their cybersecurity, supply chain risk management, and resilience operating through the breach. And I think that's a really important point when you look at the challenges that we have today with the adversaries spending a lot of time inside the environment. Those are the pieces that are really important. If an adversary breaks into your system and you detect that adversary as soon as they try to move laterally, or they steal credentials and try to elevate privileges, then you've really had a significant impact in mitigating the impact of that breach, because they weren't able to exfiltrate data and they weren't able to encrypt any systems if it was a ransomware attack. So those are really important points, is how do we build a structure to ensure that we can identify the attacker quickly and mitigate the impact of that breach. SolarWinds, as we know, one company detected it, and they were inside the systems for 9 months. And the company that was breached, in that case that detected it, has some of the best experts in the world in incident response. So I think that's an important point, that we need to continue to look at new technology to ensure that we're doing everything we can, to focus on detecting the adversary quickly, making sure that breakout time doesn't happen, or if it does, it takes them a long time to break out. we shrink the dwell time very quickly. And, in doing that, keeping the breakout time to a maximum, dwell time to a minimum, then the containment time hopefully has shrunk dramatically as well, where we contain them very quickly on one or two systems, kick them out, and then remediate how they got in. And it's a lesson learned, and we move on. So what do we do at Ativo? We're really experts in identity compromise, privilege escalation, and lateral movement prevention and detection. And that is so key to everything I just talked about, is the visibility, that attack surface reduction, and the asset defense. Visibility to understand, ahead of time where the problems you may have inside your environment before a breach happens. So clean it up. Cyber hygiene is a really important one for all of you that are running Active Directory. I've been advocating for quite some time that focusing on Active Directory should be a component of cyber hygiene. And if you're not, then you've got attack paths inside your environment that you're not aware of, that you haven't cleaned up yet, and that an adversary could take advantage of. All of the major breaches lately, the adversaries have utilized Active Directory when it was present. In fact, there were a number of studies that have taken place recently that shows that attackers typically use Active Directory 90% of the time for moving laterally and living off the land. So it's critically important that you have that visibility to understand that ahead of time. And then the attack surface reduction, helping clean up those attack paths so they can't move laterally, and asset defense. So I'll touch on these a little bit here. On the lateral movement side, really, we've got a number of different things out there that are available. Our BotSync product, which is really our network deception that provides great capabilities, for adding decoys to unused IP space. Our EDN deflect, so when someone scans a system, it redirects that information that scanned into our decoys. So and immediately you get an alert on it because no one should be touching that system. The EDN data cloaking, I love that one. It's just so much fun. And that's going through and cloaking the data that's on a system. So somebody gets in and they want to go look at shares, and you provide deceptive shares back to them. So you're hiding real shares and providing deceptive shares back to them. Lots of pieces you can do with that. EDN, AD Secure, that one is really interesting. A relatively new product for us, just came out in the last couple of years. We've had great successes with that one because it's very simply put, and I'll touch on this a little bit further, but it's simply a small piece of code that runs on an endpoint. And when the adversary does a compromise on that endpoint and they go in, one of the first things they always do is they want to query Active Directory. That query takes place, but on the endpoint, not an Active Directory, we intercept that result and provide deceptive information back, to the attacker. So they're unaware, that they're getting deceptive information back, and you've been alerted on them now and starting to really understand, what that adversary is trying to do, and they're trying to figure out where they're at and what domain administrators are there, and they really don't have a clue because the information they get has been structured by you to be deceptive. So you put them on their back footing. They're really taking home field advantage in the system. The AD Assessor piece really stretches across that visibility and attack surface reduction. Really cool product, really new for us, and doing very well because it's a single domain connected PC that you have in your system that you add this piece of code to. Only one system, not all of them, only one. Nothing happens on Active Directory. And what it does is it goes through and provides significant information to you on your attack paths in Active Directory, misconfigurations in Active Directory, and provides all the information to clean it up before the attack takes place. So suddenly you have that visibility and you clean up those attack paths, all based on having code running on a single domain connected system without putting code on Active Directory. So pretty cool. The identity compromise, is threat strike with credential cloaking, and that's providing deceptive credentials back to the adversary, as well as alerting on that. And then threat strike that allows you to put that on your endpoint, so you can literally sprinkle breadcrumbs and lures across your environment that would lead those adversaries into the decoys if you have them. So a lot of fun, and allows you to really do some research and study adversaries. The EDN threat path is the piece that allows you to go through and look at orphan credentials and shares that you may not be cognizant of that are existing inside your environment, and gives you that visibility you didn't previously have into where an attacker would go if they broke into your system. So, and based on that visibility, then you can do your attack surface reduction and clean up that environment before the attacker gets into the system. So this is just a little bit more graphical to show you that how we operate. If you look at the very bottom, the discovery, privilege escalation, lateral movement, and collection, we break up that system so that it doesn't happen, because we give you that visibility into the attack paths. We do concealment, where we hide and deny access. We give fake data back to the adversary, and then we do decoys to obfuscate attack surface. A lot of people may not be familiar. They may have missed that, but if you use the NIST cybersecurity framework, deception and decoys are in that and recommend it. Under 800 special publication 853 Rev 5, to move down this path and put decoys in, so you can really have home field advantage and take advantage of the adversary by feeding them false information. So what we really add to close gaps in layer defenses is, extending that endpoint defense, close the security gaps around Active Directory. Again, 90% of attacks utilize Active Directory, and this is an area that's just completely overlooked for some reason in many organizations. And again, all these supply chain attacks that have taken place, almost all of them, Active Directory was utilized by the attacker. So it's something we have to think about and start focusing on. I was very pleased. I was doing a board roundtable the other day, and I found 2 CISOs that own Active Directory, and I was ecstatic to hear that. I highly doubt it's a trend, but nevertheless, hopefully you have the relationship, if you don't own it, with the CIO or the team that owns it, so you can have a significant input into the security of Active Directory, because it is a major, major issue. So again, just another graphical image of how we fit in the EDN threat strike on the endpoint, threat path deflect in the AD secure that provides that deceptive information to the adversary when they're attempting to do queries to Active Directory, AD assessor that helps you clean up Active Directory, and our threat defend, which is our bot sync, our EDN and AD secure. So it really gives you a lot of pieces, across the board. And I wanted to give you just a graphical representation based on the same slide that we had before. And it just shows you that with the SolarWinds attack that took place, all the opportunities that were actually there to detect them much, much earlier in the process and not be 9 months out. Again, when they moved laterally across multiple devices, they could have been detected. And again, this went, unseen in many, many companies, a couple hundred companies that didn't see this attack, and only one did. So I think it's an important thing to think about. Are we doing everything we can to look for that lateral movement and privilege escalation? Because that's problematic. Speaking to this group, ASRG, I know that you're focused on the automotive side, but as we see more and more connected vehicles, I think supply chain is going to be critically important to automotive companies around the globe to ensure that there's nothing malicious in the systems. There's nothing that potentially is set to break something in the future, as well as protecting your intellectual property. And I think that's another critical piece. The Ativo Networks, EDN, works hand in hand with EDR. We had some studies done on this and a couple of white papers written on this. Really fun. 4 of our partners there. We've got partners with about 35 of the major players, but in this case, McAfee, SentinelOne, CrowdStrike, and FireEye are all partners. And we did the Mitre Attack do-it-yourself testing to see how we could boost performance of EDR products with EDN, and that came out very well. You can query me or the Ativo website for that white paper if you're interested. This is just a graphical exposure to show you, a threat path to reduce attack paths. So important because, again, clean up those paths before the adversary gets in, so that now what the path to your high-value assets looks like, and how you can ensure that they don't get to them because you found them and cleaned them up ahead of time. Privilege escalation, I touched on this one quite a bit, so I won't belabor this one because I know we're almost out of time. I did want to hit this one because it's just a really fun slide and just a notional company, Acme. Here's a system that an attacker hits and compromises, does the query to Active Directory, doesn't realize that AD Secure is sitting on the system and provides deceptive information back instead of the query coming back from Active Directory, and it derails the attack, with fake Active Directory objects that lead them to one of the decoys. And then on the other side of that, AD Assessor, gives them visibility into the Active Directory vulnerabilities ahead of time and allows alerts for real-time attacks. I'm going to skip this one because, I know I want to save some time for questions. I just wanted to point out that it's also very, very strong, on ransomware attack sequence and stopping that, and we've got use case after use case where we've shown where we've stopped ransomware in its tracks from propagating through a system and even finishing encrypting a single system didn't allow it to happen. So I'll pull that one out and move on here. This is the last one I wanted to talk about. Deception is very, very interesting. It's really started to take off and get significant focus around the globe. There's some comments from a couple Gartner analysts, Gorka Sadowski and some others. Really interesting. EMA, Enterprise Management Associates, their research showed that deception users reported 91% reduction in dwell time. I thought that was very interesting. The Mitre Defend piece I just mentioned was just released, and deception's been included in many of the special publications out there now from NIST that are part of the cybersecurity framework structure. So leading right into my summary here, what I wanted to touch on is get engaged. Do more workshops on supply chain risk management. If NIST is your preferred cybersecurity framework, engage with them. Go read those comments, read the drafts of the special publications, let them know if you think they're missing something. If you're in another country that, and you don't use NIST and it's not your preferred, well, engage with your own standards organization to really understand what they're doing around the cybersecurity aspects of supply chain risk management and what are they coming up with for guidance, and ensure that it's going to meet your needs. Keep focused on this issue. It's going to get worse. I started in this industry, believe it or not, in the 80s in cryptography. And as we built the internet and connected the world to it, these problems have gotten worse and more nefarious and are having a bigger and bigger impact on society. So I think we're going to have to stay on our toes and lean forward if we're going to be successful here. So at ASRG, continue doing that research, continue keeping the focus on these problems, and think outside the box. Stay up on new technology and think about what an adversary potentially could do if they got access to, your intellectual property or some of your systems, and make sure you're looking at your entire supply chain across the board. I've talked about Ativo Networks and the capabilities we provide, and we would be happy to talk to you, across the board. And that's really it for me. And I'm happy to turn it back over to Sven and take questions. So I appreciate your time and attention. And it might take him a minute to jump on board here with questions.
I think Sven has some technical trouble. Therefore, I will asking the questions. And one question is, do you think it is possible to integrate deception solution on the embedded devices, or it is more feasible for cloud and backend services? What is about resources consumption?
Yeah, it's a great question. And if it's IP addressable and even an embedded device, I don't see any reason it wouldn't be possible. I think that it's certainly worth looking at on the research side. Giving an example, Department of Energy and Pacific Northwest National Labs in the United States, the U.S. Department of Energy, reached out to us and asked us about a year and a half ago if we would work with them to move deception into cyber physical systems. So where there was no telemetry, so they could get telemetry. And we did that and worked with them very closely. And they just did another press release on it. The Pacific Northwest National Labs, that's a U.S. national laboratory, released information on shadow figment that is part of our technology. So I think if it's IP addressable and you've got an operating system running on it, there's no reason why it couldn't be moved into the stack. But it would take some looking at to see if there's financial reasons to do it or not do it. But certainly, if it's IP addressable, why not?
Okay, thank you very much. And the second question is, very interesting presentation. Can the presenter please explain the difference between the Attivo solutions and classic honeypot solutions?
Oh, good question. Thank you for that. I started with honeypots in 1999. So there's a global organization called the HoneyNet Project, and the founder of that, Lance Spitzner, is a good friend, and I'd not met him, but I reached out to him back in the 90s, and we became good friends. And I played with honeypots quite a bit and brought them into the organization I was part of at the time. And honeypots really were designed to do research with, at that time, to run on the internet, see how quickly a system could get breached, and gather information, on the adversary. And we've come a long way since then. I really liked that capability, but it took a tremendous amount of undertaking to have expertise in all the applications you want to run on it, the operating systems that you run on it, the hardware that you're running on, if you were doing back then a bare metal build. So it was a lot of complexity in trying to gather information, as well as to defend those systems, and the fact that at that point in time, they potentially could be utilized against you. Lance wrote up a set of papers called Know Your Enemy that are very good and have been compiled into a book now that you could probably find out there on the internet. Very interesting. But today, deception is totally different. Today, it's extensible, it's flexible, and it's automated. So you can take deception today, you can run it in the cloud, or you can run it on premise with an appliance or a virtual solution where it can run in your unused IP space, can sit there and quietly and passively listen to your traffic. And then provide back a plan, recommendation. So on what operating system should be run in the unused IP space for these virtualized decoys. And then, can help you build a deception campaign to mirror your own environment. So it's much more configurable, easy to run, and easy to maintain than honeypots were. We've got about 50% of the Fortune 10 are our customers, really, really large players. And they use deception today, and many of them, have half a man year utilized on these systems to maintain and run deception. And if you were trying to do the same thing with honeypots or open source, you would likely have 50, 60, 70 people assigned to it each year for the size of those companies. So it's a big difference in the automation that we have and the machine learning that can listen to your own environment and provide that recommended plan back. And when you add in the pieces now on the host, on the endpoint side, where you can provide deceptive information back to attackers doing queries, none of that was possible in the past, and that's even still relatively new. It's new capabilities on the deceptive side that simply aren't there in honeypots.
Okay, so Dirk requested me to take over. Thanks for the question, for the answer to this question. I have a last question to you. Do you just had some touch points with the automotive industry? And if you look,
Did we lose you? I heard touch points with the automotive industry, and it stopped.
So I think it is a technical problem. Therefore, I saw just now another question. So what kind of system can be simulated, faked, for example, endpoints, servers, operation systems? It is also possible to fake a whole CI/CD, CDLC system.
You can fake pretty much any system that has an operating system on it that's IP addressable. Like I said, we even moved into cyber physical systems. we have, I'll give you one that's a great example. We have a medical system that a customer asked us to build, and we did a partnership with a medical lab manufacturer and created an infusion pump decoy. So pretty much anything that you want to build deception around, you can. It's not trivial, and you want to make sure that you've got a model that there's a reason to do it, where it's financially viable. But yeah, you could pretty much, build deception for anything. We do IoT, ICS systems, cyber physical systems. So yeah, if it's IP addressable and it's got an operating system, you can probably build a decoy for it. We've got some customers in the utility sector that are doing some really unique things with deception, which is a lot of fun.
Okay, thanks a lot for answers and for that very, very great presentation.
Well, thank you very much to the audience, to ASRG, to everyone on the staff supporting and getting this set up. And I will also get a PDF of this presentation and send it over to the team so that you can utilize this and share with your members if they wish to have it. And happy to follow up with anybody if they want to reach out to me.
Yeah, thank you very much. We can spread this information then in our community. Yeah, thank you for all attendees, for all participants, and I wish you good night, good day, whatever you are. Thank you.